So this week your homework was to study the chapter on the wisdom factors of right view and right intention. And I'd like to know if you understand right view as both the entry point to the Dhamma and the culmination of a completely developed practice. So we'll start with Matt. Good to see you tonight.
Good to see you, John. I feel like the wisdom factors of the Eightfold Path are really fundamental too, in that developing right view without some kind of embodied practice is difficult. I think that practicing shamatha vipassana really helps quiet and stabilize the mind to where you can actually start to see things clearly. And I found this to be the same with my Qigong practice as well. In that views of self are held, stored in the body as tension. Without having a practice like Qigong or shamatha vipassana or both, it's hard to recognize that.
Yeah.
It's hard to recognize that clinging is what creates that tension that results in a view of self that is then stored and influences the way in which we relate to ourselves and to others. So, and then developing those practices, both the shamatha vipassana and Qigong for myself, I found that when those places of tension and holding can be let go of and softened into, what's clear in right view. So that's my experience with particularly with right view.
Thank you. That was wonderful. From my experience too, I think Qigong is the most complementary body-based practice to the Eightfold Path and what the Buddha taught. And your insight that all of it rests on deepening our concentration and requires that is so important. You know, the common human problem of a distracted, conditioned mind is only addressed through that, and then understanding. I guess you could say the entry point to right view is accepting that my view in the current moment is a wrong view. It's lacking understanding of what that means, and it's because of that a distracted, conditioned mind that it's almost impossible to gain right view without that, and that it's part of a practice. And it brings us into what's occurring right now. It's not an escape from where we are, meaning being in our body and being present with what's occurring. It puts us right in our place where we belong. So thank you for that. Luke, good to see you tonight. How's your practice going?
I like what you just said, of sort of putting you in your place, of not, I don't know, just getting rid of all the false BS and just getting down to the root of the present moment. For me personally, it's been almost amusing to see the level of resistance. Nothing else really beyond that, but just sort of reflecting, trying to be gentle, and definitely breaking apart a lot of mental constructs that were plaguing me. And finding, like I said, sort of finding the humor in it has been somewhat refreshing for me.
Yeah, but that's an essential aspect of beginning right view, isn't it? That we recognize the absurdity of some of these views that we have and how we see the world. It really is quite hilarious when it has no real basis in reality.
Sure. And for me,
Yeah,
going from the rage to the humor has been a nice step. You know what I mean? It's been like
Yeah.
the resistance has sort of helped cultivate like a lot of just straight up rage. You know what I mean? Like anger, frustration to wanting to change the current situation or headspace or whatever.
Yeah. Despite the often hurtful consequences of anger and rage, when you really look at it, it is laughable. That what are we upset at? Nothing. Literally nothing. It's like Buddha always says, foam on the ocean. There's nothing there to be upset with, unless we're taking things personally, which we learn not to do. Thank you. Keith, good to see you tonight. How are you? How's your study?
My study is great, thank you. Great to be here. Yeah, amusing is a very good word for the battle between right view and your conditioned thinking. When you actually sit back and look at what the things that you've held in your mind your whole life that don't even make any sense, but they've always been there. So just assume that that's the way to go. When you start to actually use right view and right intention, it is pretty humorous that it didn't make sense before. Like it took me a long time to get to this point anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, and as far as what was the second part of the question? Is the culmination of the practice?
To see right view as the culmination of a fully developed. In other words, in a fully awake and fully mature human being now sees their self in relation to the world through a right view. There's no wrong views. There's no confused or deluded views. When the Buddha described right view, he described it as a view that fully understands dukkha, fully understands stress, a view that has developed from abandoning craving and clinging, a view that has experienced the actual cessation of suffering, and a view that has been developed through the Eightfold Path. That's the description. And of course, that's what we're doing. For most of us, it's a gradual process of seeing the absurdity of holding on to wrong views. So you're describing that beautifully.
That's all I have.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Helen.
Hello, John. Good to be here. I don't know that I have any profound revelations this week.
That's okay.
I think I'm just okay with where I am and how I see things.
It's a nice place to be, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah. Glad you're here tonight.
thank you.
Melanie, how are you tonight? Good to see
Very
you.
good to see you. Yes, for me, where I'm at is looking at right view and thinking. As my meditation is, at least I'm doing it more. That's where I'm at with that. But what I've noticed is during the day being more aware of my view on things and my craving and clinging. And that's been kind of interesting for me. Because I noticed for me with parenting, as I brought up the first time I was here, that's where I see a lot of the craving and clinging really coming out.
Sure, yeah, of course.
And for example, coming here tonight, my son came home sick from school, and I was, not that you want to be desensitized from what's going around, and that's going to be the struggle for me, is saying, okay, I feel a little bit more like, okay, I can do something instead of focusing on him being sick and come out and do this tonight. And that, in a weird way, was a way of not craving, clinging. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Because I was saying, okay, I took care of him. I got medicine. He's relaxed. My husband's there. And so now I can not be craving and clinging. I mean, am I applying this the right way?
Oh, yes, exactly. So it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be concerned when our children are sick.
Right.
What it really means is we don't insist that it be any different and react in a foolish way to that, which then leaves us in a less than ideal position to be an effective mother or effective parent.
Well, it's annoying to my children.
Sure, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it certainly is. Yeah, it's one of the things that when people first come to the Dhamma and start getting an understanding of the major foundation is recognizing and abandoning self-referential views. It feels like what we're moving towards is a place of complete detachment and not caring. When the truth of the matter is we're gaining the deep concentration and the refined mindfulness to be fully present with what's occurring and respond from a place of right view rather than react from a place of wrong view. In other words, we're just simply more helpful, we're more loving, we're more compassionate in our lives that way. We're not stuck in those wrong views. Thank you for bringing that up. It's a very good point. And the other aspect of these first two factors is right intention, which is the intention to recognize and abandon craving and clinging. And I think you see how that follows from the beginning of right view, or having the understanding that maybe my views aren't all 100% correct, and that as I deepen and hold in mind the right intention to recognize craving and clinging where they lead me to, we're able to simply abandon those views. But you need that intention behind it too. You know, I always, when I talk about right intention, I always think back to these conversations I had about 25 years ago with a friend of mine who was a Buddhist practitioner. And we had this ongoing discussion, sometimes heated argument, that intention had no business at all in the Buddhist teachings. And of course, it's one of the essential aspects of the Buddhist teachings. So we don't have the right intention to recognize and abandon craving and clinging, we'll never recognize it. We'll simply continue it. We could develop the other 7 factors of the Eightfold Path, but lacking that intention, nothing will be developed. So everything that the Buddha taught within the framework of the Eightfold Path is an essential part of the path. We can't discard any of it either. Again, you described that beautifully. Thanks, Melanie. Stefan, good to see you tonight.
Good to see you too. I think my practice is going well. I've been sitting fairly consistently, and I've been feeling like during the course of each sit, I can often feel, I'll say, a deepening of concentration. Like,
Okay.
I feel like I'm able to stick with it more, stick with it better as the sits go on. In the reading, I was noticing the part you're talking about right view and right intention being sort of how you get into the whole experience, but also, being at the end of the path. It's sort of, if you get down through the 8 factors, you come back around the beginning, so
Yeah.
it sort of glues it together. What you were saying about intention just now, sometimes I think there's a paradox in Buddhism about intention, because if you, in an ordinary sense of the word, absolutely right intention is important, and it's clearly one of the factors of the Eightfold Path. But somehow it seems contradictory to the idea of anatta, of not a self. But like, what is it that has this intention that's so important?
What a great question.
Right?
And one day I'll answer it.
Right.
No, I'll answer it to the best of my ability right now. When the Buddha used the word anatta, he was not, and I know you've heard me say this before, he was not using the word to imply that there's no such thing as a self. He was simply using the word to say that anatta means not a self. And he was simply using the word to say that your views that you're holding of yourself do not constitute a realistic view of self. Let go of the views. And so everything the Buddha taught was to recognize and abandon self-referential views that are rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. So coming back to that intention to recognize and abandon craving and clinging views, then allows us to get to the point of understanding that what constitutes a self is always in a constant process of becoming. In other words, you can't say that, well, I began here and now I'm here and I'm going to carry this present me forever throughout endless lifetimes, which is what many people believe. Rather than understanding that everything I am in this present moment is a culmination of my past. Well, this is an explanation of karma too. Karma is a present moment unfolding of past intentional or volitional actions moderated by the present level of our current mindfulness. And if that current mindfulness is still rooted in ignorance, we can only give birth to another ignorant-based moment. But as we start developing the Dhamma, and we gain the understanding through a basic understanding of right view and right intention, then each moment holds the potential to incline our minds and our experience to develop freedom from self-referential views and the confusion, delusion, and suffering that entails. So again, what that means is that the Buddha's not saying, in these teachings don't say there's no such thing as a self. It simply teaches that what a self is in a constant state of becoming. We can never find a place in time that we can describe a permanent self, even though a self-referential ego-based view insists that this is who I am and this is who I will always be. There's no room for the constant impermanence unfolding in that view. And that's really why stress and suffering arises. Because the world, the external world, is in a constant state of flux, a constant state of change. Another way of saying it, you could say that the external world is also in a constant state of becoming. And if we don't allow ourselves to be part of that becoming, we're simply creating an ignorant and a stressful view. Does that answer your question? That's a lot of long words.
Well, what I'm getting out of that is that it makes more sense if you put it all in the context of impermanence. In a way, the whole notion of intention only makes sense in an always fluctuating environment.
Yes.
Because if everything is fixed, if anything is fixed, unchangeable, then having an intention about it is kind of meaningless.
Yes, and there's where the seeming paradox comes up.
Yeah, right.
Another way of describing the purpose of the Buddhist teaching is to fully understand what is called the three marks of existence, of impermanence, the not self-characteristic, and resulting dukkha. And so it seems almost foolish. I remember I got a question from an online student one time in the beginning part of the course. And I was asking the question, do you understand impermanence? He says, of course I understand impermanence. Why is that even a teaching? Everything is impermanent. But what he really doesn't understand is that applies to our views. And because of conditioned, ignorant views, we think that we can establish a permanent self. And that really is the great insight that the Buddha realized. There's no such thing as a permanent self. But that does not imply that there's nothing there. And the best example of that is the Buddha's own life. He awakened. Now, there's some traditions that think when you awaken, poof, you just vanish from existence. Of course, the Buddha showed that by his own life, that he awakened and he lived 45 more years, probably the most effective and successful life that any human being ever lived. He didn't vanish. He gained the ability to understand clearly through right view who he was in relation to this impermanent world, and that he himself was always in the process of becoming. So the seeming paradox is belied by understanding our relationship in the three marks of existence. Just as the external world is always in a state of becoming or impermanent, so are we. And it almost seems inconsequential to understand that, but when you really understand it, that's the essence of what we're looking at. And it allows us the great freedom to not take anything personally, because nothing is. If I am in a constant state of becoming, what occurs to me in this moment cannot be taken personal, because there's nothing here permanent to have that effect on. And that frees my mind to simply be present without any type of discriminating discursive thought that I need to either enjoy this moment or decide that I don't. I can simply be present with whatever occurs, whether it's seemingly upsetting or it's seemingly exciting. I'm just present with what's occurring. Exciting meaning right in this moment I'm getting everything that I want. It doesn't matter. What's more important is to be fully present with what's occurring, because we have to understand the first noble truth. Dukkha occurs. It's a natural consequence of living in the world. When we create a misunderstanding and misapplication of self in relation to dukkha, then life is a constant struggle of chasing those things that give us pleasure and insisting that we avoid everything that might give us displeasure. And along the way, we miss everything that's in the middle, which is what we're neutral to. So the paradox, the seeming paradox, is that initially we think that this teaching describes a situation where there's no such thing as a self. And that's a misunderstanding. And it's one of the misunderstandings that is somewhat and often very promoted in later developed schools, a lack of understanding of not self or anatta. So the Buddha, again, the Buddha's not saying that there's some essential nature underlying, it's often called Buddha nature or Buddhahood, underlying who we are, because that doesn't make sense. That's establishing a permanent self that somehow became corrupted. I remember when I first realized that, and it allowed me to stop chasing this inner Buddha nature, was that if I had an inner Buddha nature, how did that inner Buddha nature become so confused to get me to the point where I needed to understand anything? Why wasn't I able to stay there? And then why would I chase a nature that is so prone to confusion, delusion, and suffering? Again, the Buddha never taught that there's an inner Buddha nature or an inner essential self. He taught that what we think of as self is in a constant state of becoming. And what is the most safe and sane method of recognizing that? It's the Eightfold Path. Again, the Buddha provided the Eightfold Path as a framework for recognizing who we are in relation to the impermanent nature of the world. Another way of saying that, the Eightfold Path is a way of recognizing those three marks of existence through right view. So, again, I hope I helped that paradox.
Yeah, I think so.
It's a very subtle but very basic teaching, and it does contradict a view that this is who I am and this is who I will always be. You know, including the beliefs that when I die, this person somehow transmigrates through different lifetimes into the future and into the. That doesn't relate to the three marks of existence at all, does it? And again, it's something that the Buddha rejected during his time too. But I don't want to get into karma and rebirth. We'll talk about that in week 9. But that's an essential part of understanding. Now that I mention it, the key understanding of rebirth is what we give birth to in each moment. And if our minds are still rooted in ignorance and reaction, what we will give birth to, what we will rebirth, is another ignorant self prone to confusion and suffering. When we start developing the Dhamma, we now gain the ability to give birth to a moment that is inclined towards awakening, a moment that is free of confusion and views. And that's really what constitutes a self, something always in a constant process of becoming. So again, the teachings don't say you're not real. What it's saying is it's just your views of yourself that are not based in reality, period. So,
but it doesn't necessarily mean that every now you are a completely different person either. You know, like there are certain elements it seems that carry over, like a person who is more or less inherently kind.
yes.
In the next moment, likely to still be kind.
There is, yes, and that's such an essential part of understanding becoming. Continuity does not what's the right word I'm trying to think of? Continuity does not dismiss impermanence, it's simply a part of impermanence. Is that clear?
Continuity, what did you just say? Continuity is impermanent?
Continuity is an aspect of impermanence. Just because you can recognize something continuous. I've been continually involved in this human life for 61 plus years. But a clear understanding recognized that even from one moment ago, physiologically, I'm a different person. And emotionally, mentally, and I use the word loosely, spiritually, hopefully I'm always in a constant state of developing and understanding who I am in relation to the world. So there's obvious continuity here. But within that continuity is an aspect of ongoing impermanence. Another word for that then in this context is ongoing becoming. So hopefully a kind and generous person will continue, and likely will, continue those aspects of themselves. In other words, that's continuous. And they may even increase. And there is the impermanence. Impermanence is a very subtle thing at times. You know, when we see an earthquake or an explosion or something like that, that's obvious. Well, there's a good example of impermanence. But within each and every one of us, if we understand the Dhamma, we'll recognize the impermanence of all things within ourselves. Lao Tzu, the great Chinese sage who developed the I Ching, said, once you recognize the impermanence of all things, you'll let go of everything. Because why hold on to things, including self-referential views?
So the idea that you can't step in the same river twice, it's still water, it's just different water.
Yep.
So you can still have some traits that are continuums, but they're perhaps embellished in a different way because of the next moment.
Yes, and through right intention, we can recognize and abandon those views that lead to thoughts, words, and deeds. In fact, now we're getting into some of the talk tonight, the thoughts, words, and deeds that are no longer appropriate within the framework of the Eightfold Path. But of course, there is continuation. Another example of that is when Kandana awakened. I don't know if you heard me say this. Kandana heard the Four Noble Truths for the first time, and he said to the Buddha, all conditioned things that arise are subject to cessation. And the Buddha says, you got it. You understand. You're now Anakandana, the one who understands. Even that description and declaration seems almost too simplistic until you understand that Kandana was mostly applying that to himself, meaning all these conditioned thoughts that I have that are arising in my life, they're all subject to cessation. Just like Lao Tzu said, I'm going to let them all go. And then I can see what's occurring, because I don't have a self-referential view to cloud what's occurring in this moment. Another word for that is confirmation bias or conditioned thinking. We're biased or conditioned to see things in a way that only affirms the views that we have. And we fit things into those contexts rather than having the understanding of continuation within impermanence to know that everything is in a constant state of flux, including my views. Boy, what a great discussion. So you instigated a lot there. Was it helpful, or did I contribute more to your confusion?
No, I don't think it contributed to my confusion. Yeah, I think it's helpful and helpful to keep thinking about how the three characteristics are kind of the environment for everything else we're talking about.
Yeah, those three marks of existence are just that. They're sometimes called I can't think of the word. Using that word marks means that we're all marked by these three things. We all it's all part of our struggle until we understand it. Everybody is subject to impermanence. In the human realm, until we've developed the Dhamma, we are stuck in this thing known as anatta, the not self characteristic, meaning our views do not constitute a self, even though we assume that they do. Assumes assumptions are another word for fabrications. And because we don't understand the reaction between the not self and impermanence, stress or dukkha arises. The three marks of existence. Thank you. It's a great discussion. And we'll get into this. We'll get into the three marks in week 6, and dependent origination will help explain how this whole process arises. In the 9th week we'll get into karma and rebirth. The book is written in a way that each week lays the foundation for the subsequent week, and the subsequent week helps develop a deeper understanding of what we just studied. So it's an ongoing process. Thank you. Don, it's good to see you tonight. I know you just joined us in the study, but
Yeah.
what do you have to say for yourself?
Yeah. After that, what can I say? Right view, when I think of right view and ditto with everything everyone was saying, but for me, to keep it simple, I think I need to think back to the Four Noble Truths and what that really means to me, and how my ego personality wants, the clinging and the craving and what, someone we spoke about Nata tonight also. I look at that as my ego personality, something like that. kind of makes a little more sense to me somehow.
Yeah.
Because it leaves a door open for something else. And I think this kind of dovetails what everyone was talking about with the celebration that we just had, where we wrote down things we want to let go of and we threw those into the fire. And for me, it really works nicely with right view and right intention, because like the paradox that was going around, that was being discussed, by letting go, for me, it's actually leaving the door open so things can come in. If that makes sense. So it's kind of, that's what the paradox for me that's what it kind of means to me. By letting go of clinging and craving, by accepting impermanence fully as being, it's not something that's going to create anxiety, but something that's going to actually be, it's almost like a revelation, and I can take a deep breath, like, yeah, everything's impermanent. And when I really understand what that means, in context of the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths and the book and the teachings, I find relief in that.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of interesting, saying something like, my life, everything is impermanent, and that means my ego is going to go too, along with everything else. But somehow that gives me relief. I mean, great relief, like relief that I've never felt before. And I think for me, that's kind of a little bit of a breakthrough this year that I've experienced that, because on the other hand, I do continue to take things very personally, and that's a bit of a struggle for me still. But there's that kind of duality going on there.
Yeah. Well, you're so right in bringing up the Four Noble Truths and what we're talking about, because taken out of the context of the Four Noble Truths, everything that the Buddha said or I say really amounts to nonsense. But when you keep it in the context of the Four Noble Truths and understand that's all that the Buddha ever taught, was developing understanding of these four truths, then it makes sense. Then you see how it fits. There's an article on my website that I wrote in response to someone talking about the many paradoxes in the Buddha's Dhamma. And I won't get into the article tonight, but you might want to read it. It's called Paradox in the Dhamma. And really, there is no paradox in the Dhamma, but you have to see it in the right context, or everything seems kind of paradoxical. What do you mean there's no such thing as a self? Here I am. Well, again, that's not what the Buddha said. He said that it's a misunderstanding of what constitutes a self that leads to suffering, leads to dukkha. Thank you. Glad you're here tonight. Danielle, it's good to see you again. How are you doing?
Okay.
Oh, good.
I feel like my practice kind of goes in waves with the semester.
It's impermanent.
Yeah. I find that, towards the beginning I can take steps back a little bit easier, and then as it goes on and everything gets more stressful and I'm spending more time with other students who are kind of also freaking out, it doesn't help. And I have a hard time personally with the nature of school sometimes, because it's hard for me to not take being graded and judged constantly personally. And so when I can separate that out and recognize that it's not a reflection on, self, I guess, I don't know how to say it, but everything just seems much easier.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of just working through that, and I don't have too much to add.
Well, I'm so glad you're here tonight, and you're getting to the essence of it. When we stop taking things so personally, it doesn't hurt so much. It's not so confusing. It doesn't lead us to continue to develop reactions in our minds. We can stay at peace. Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad you're here tonight. Mark, good to see you. How's your practice?
Practice is going well. Just kind of talking through right view and right intention. Right now, I'm running up against a lot of very hardened views that I've had for a very long time.
Good for you.
I know what you mean. It's a good place to be, and in its own way, it feels like the right place to because it feels like progress. So I'm trying to just remain kind and gentle to myself, and continue to have the right intention to move through it, and at the same time not to push through it. I know I talked about last week when I was here, just trying to sit with emotions as they come up, as opposed to trying to analyze them and get to the root cause and all of those things that in the past I tried to do pretty consistently, and it was very confusing. So now, instead of wanting to not necessarily feel something that feels bad, I just sit with it. And it may lead to an understanding, and it may not. It may just dissipate. But I feel like what I've been able to do more and more with that is to recognize that it's coming from a very hardened set of views that I have that have been there for a very long time. So yeah, in some way it's exciting to be at that level, and I just continue to try to have the right intention to let go of those views. So.
Thank you. This is an interesting vantage point as I get to see how this is the second time for many of us going through the Dhamma study this way as a Sangha, and to see the application of the Dhamma and the insights into the three marks of existence is really remarkable for all of you. I mean, and this is exactly how it should work. This is why the Buddha taught what he taught. Thank you. Diane, good to see you tonight. Carpe diem.
Yes. This is good. My understanding, and I'm not arrived or anything, but the way where I am with right view is probably very elementary, but I'm learning to love who I am. And I've been kind of composing my own metta that really touched my heart a little bit more than the other mettas that I've been saying. And I gave myself permission, and this is really authoritative and powerful for me, to actually do this wonderful metta for me first.
Good for you.
I mean, because I have this hardened conditioned thinking that I really ought to do it for, the whole world, et cetera, et cetera. And it's kind of this, developing this view of myself is really breaking through a lot of cement of hardened thoughts of, things that I've done wrong, things that I'm stupid about, and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of that conditioned thinking. And it's, that's where I am. And it feels really okay, because when I then go into this wonderful little metta that is evolving, and I do it for other people, it's like, wow, I really mean it.
Yep.
And I really hope and wish this for them, and I can visualize this metta happening for others, and it's comforting as well, because I too, as Mark has said, crack. But you know what? Doggone, I was walking here and I was thinking over the cobblestone sidewalk, and I think, isn't it marvelous how the roots come up and push the cobblestones anyway? With all this stuff that we try to really keep Earth the way it's supposed to be and the way we want it to look, there come those roots. And I was thinking about right view with this. When in developing this, and I know my words aren't Buddhistic.
They're good enough.
Buddhistic. How's that for? That loving who I am and kind of sticking with that helps me that's a root. To me, that's right view. That's the root of who I am. Once I, as I develop this view, then it feels good.
Thank you. That's great. Views rooted in wrong view will always push through and cause stress and suffering. And views rooted in right view will always bring lasting peace and happiness. And you're so right that metta is first applied to ourselves. And then we can truly be meaningfully compassionate with other people. But it begins with ourselves. The Buddha didn't teach anything at all until he awakened. And then he brought us the greatest teaching the world has ever seen. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't be loving and compassionate and helpful towards others prior to our own awakening. But it does mean that to shine the light on how important it is to develop awakening. If we truly care, that's why I say it here often, the most loving thing I can do for myself and for all other human beings is to take to the Dhamma and awaken. And that's just what you express in better words than I just used. So thank you.
Well, part of this for me is, I think part of the stuff that part of the view I had of a monk or Buddhist or a really spiritual person is that they were like stoic, nothing ever bothered them, and I'm not there yet, and I'm realizing that it's okay for me to use some of these little things like enthusiasm that I have and passion that I have to help this view along, of this love along. And then I maybe don't need to be so passionate or so enthusiastic about it, because there's, passion and enthusiasm have their opposites as well, which can, crash and crumble the whole thing. So the balance is coming.
It certainly is, and that's where right intention is very valuable in maintaining a mindful presence without getting overly passionate.
That's where the Sangha is helpful, and a teacher is helpful to go home and let it all.
Yeah. All part of the 3 refuges.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bonnie, good to see you tonight. How are you? How's your study?
It's good, and it just, I think I mentioned it last week, it just seems the more I sit, but yesterday, so different than the sit I just had, which was like when you said, that last callback, I was like, what? Because the whole entire time I sat yesterday morning, I couldn't wait for it to, I was like, oh my God, when's it gonna, we use a singing bowl, so just instead of being called back to end, and I was like, oh my God, I was almost next to tears because but I kept saying, but it was like, because I was experiencing one thing the other day and I was interrupted by something impermanent, because everything just can't be copacetic. So it's like waking up, in a way, in the middle. So I keep going to sleep and waking up, and going to sleep and waking up in a way. And I'm trying in the meditation to remind myself that it's okay. All these things will be taken care of. So it's like seeing this, having the view, the intention, and with everybody saying it rolls down the hill and it comes back up again and it starts over again, because, clinging to this, wanting things to be copacetic, and then we're back to the stress again. And I want to be able to, I guess maybe it's the attachment to feeling like I can do something about it. And what I need to remember is, because after I sort of move into what needs to be done, it's okay. It's all right. And so I'm trying to remind myself when I'm feeling like the stress of needing to fix something or do something or be in it. So it's just this play of just waking up, okay, poof, I'm going to sleep, wake up, it's like, oh. But it's all good because it's part of the ongoing process of growing. So.
Thank you. You've all heard me talk about Arnold Patton and his saying that if you want to get to Chicago and you're in New York, but you believe you're in Los Angeles, you can't get there. He also said that if you have the strong, intense desire to do something, sit down, stop, and figure it out. Do it with a calm and peaceful mind. Liz, how are you tonight? It's good to see you.
Good. I really enjoyed tonight's talk. I'm glad to be here. What Matt said to me about the clinging embodying itself in the body, finding a place in the body, and how these different body movements and meditation can help process those things through. I think what we're all talking about is a sense of softening, and so that's what I'm appreciating these days is the extent to which I have softened over the last year. I was listening to the talk from this day last year on Cross River meditation, and it was just good to kind of have some perspective on that space between then and now, and how things are starting to feel like they're coming together a little more, and that I'm able to let go of some of the things that I've held on to, in my body when stress occurs, and even recognizing those moments when I'm under a stressful situation and it tightens, and how I can breathe through it and let that go. So I just, I keep reminding myself that with everything we study, it goes back to the Four Noble Truths.
Yep.
And that's sort of the underlying current. The new discussion comes up, and then you take it back to the Four Noble Truths, and it all just becomes very, it just creates this structure and space, this refuge, that you can kind of sit within all of that and not have to think, well, is right view how I see the way the world is? Well, no, it's right view is how it relates back to the Four Noble Truths, and there's nothing more. You don't have to take it anywhere else.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
that's sort of what I've been playing with.
Outstanding. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, everything is in the context of the Four Noble Truths. Developing that understanding. Joe, good to see you tonight.
John, it's good to be here. My practice is going well enough for as new as it is. And the difference, I suppose, this week was that physically I was in a lot of pain. So it was more of a real distraction than an emotional pain or any other type of pain. For me anyway, it was more real. So it was something that was a little more real to get over when I sat also, because I was uncomfortable, and it was at the back of my mind. And as far as the chapter goes, I read it, and then, it's 21 pages, but it weighs several tons. So, I do what I would do with a technical manual or any other subject that I want to learn. So I got the highlighter out, and I read it, and got the mechanics of the language down and what it is that it was supposed to mean at my level anyway. And like what I would normally do with a technical manual, I went back to the beginning. Where is the beginning in all this? There's got to be the beginning in here somewhere. So, and it is pretty, at least to me, it was clear that with right view and right intention, the beginning was with right intention. The very first few words was to develop an understanding that was supposed to take you through the rest of this giant project. So what I did with it was go back to, I kind of stopped there with right view and right intention and went back to the Four Noble Truths. And what I tried to do for the rest of the week was become very ego conscious. So everything I did, because I have nothing better to do, everything I did, I tried to dissect it within through the lens of, if I opened the car door with a flourish because a pretty girl walked by, or whatever the case may be, I made that up.
That's where I was at. I didn't get much further than that. And then also with clinging, craving, I really tried to dissect everything I thought, everything I did, what was going on around me, and how it affects everything. And it does, it becomes this person that you are, that you think you are, which is a giant, like I mentioned last week. Fabrication.
Thank you so much. I mean, you're pointing out the paradoxes in the book. The beginning is dependent origination, which is week 8. But we don't have the context to even apply that until we get there. We need the rest of these other teachings. And if you think of how the book is structured, we first learned how to meditate. Shamatha Vipassana is week 1. Then we understood. Then we developed an understanding of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is what we experience in meditation. And then the 4 Noble Truths are there to introduce that. And now we've introduced another practice. But it takes at first an intellectual understanding, and then we can start applying these teachings in a more practical and realistic way. And again, that's what's developed through the course, and it's what is developed by integrating the Eightfold Path as our framework for living our life. So great. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. Billy, welcome to our Sangha. How was your meditation, and what do you think about all this?
I'm just at a loss because I don't understand the terminology, the full path, truths, or anything like that.
It's much out of context for you.
Yeah, that's the only thing. I haven't read much on Buddhism and stuff like that. It's not what I've studied, so I'm just at a loss for that. But I can't imagine it being much different than other practices. Like today I woke up, realized that this is my only day. So I try to be happy all day long, just enjoy my day because it's the only one I have right now. I'm just in that spot where I try not to think about yesterday, try not to think about tomorrow. And like I said, I wish I knew what. Can you just tell me what the 4 Noble Truths are?
Oh yeah, the first Noble Truth, they're depending on the context, they're said slightly different ways. But the first Noble Truth is that there is dukkha. Dukkha means is an ancient Pali word that means everything from mild disappointment to extreme emotional and physical suffering. Dukkha's in the world. Another way that it's said, and I like it a little better, is that dukkha occurs, meaning it's simply a consequence of living in the world. There's going to be disappointing, unsatisfactory moments. The second Noble Truth is that craving originates and clinging perpetuates. The first Noble Truth, suffering. The third Noble Truth, which relates directly to impermanence, is that cessation of that process is possible. And the fourth Noble Truth is that it is the Eightfold Path that develops the cessation of craving, clinging, and subsequent suffering. So again, it's pretty concise and pithy teaching, but everything the Buddha taught for 45 years was in the context of and to develop an understanding of the 4 Noble Truths. Yeah, it's a great question. I'm sorry I didn't bring it up before, knowing that you're new.
Okay.
So I hope you continue to join us. That's what the ongoing classes are about, is to develop an understanding of the broader framework in which the Buddha taught meditation. And that's an important point that I'll just make briefly, that the Buddha didn't teach just meditation, meaning just go and meditate and you're good to go. He understood the common human problem of conditioned thinking, and often if we just meditate, all that we're doing is reinforcing that conditioned thinking, which, I know plenty of people that led to some pretty severe mental and emotional problems because they didn't have the right context. So the Buddha recognized conditioned thinking, and he presented the Eightfold Path to overcome that common human problem. And that's really all that he taught. But he taught how to apply it. And again, I say this often too. If you read the Buddha's original teachings that are contained in a set of books called the Pali Canon, and you take one sutta and just read it, more than likely it's going to sound like complete nonsense because you don't have any understanding of how to apply it in what context it's taught. But when you understand that everything the Buddha taught was in relation to these 4 Noble Truths, it makes perfect sense, or at least somewhat perfect sense. So, again, welcome to our Sangha. I'm glad you're here. So I'll just give a brief introduction to this week's study because you're going to do the homework. So we're going to study the virtuous factors of the Eightfold Path: right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And it is these three factors primarily that some people feel that the Buddha was trying to teach a religion because of these moral and ethical factors. And the real reason, that's not to say that we shouldn't be morally and ethically correct, and the Buddha certainly encouraged that. But the reason why these are part of the Eightfold Path is that it is from recognizing in thought, word, and deed our relationship to right speech, right action, and right livelihood that we're able to recognize and abandon craving and clinging. In other words, if you look in how the Eightfold Path is often presented, beginning with right view and right intention, the wisdom factors are followed by the virtuous factors of right speech, action, and livelihood. So now we've developed this strong intention to recognize and abandon craving and clinging. Now we bring into mind, hold in mind, being mindful of. Mindfulness means to recognize or to hold in mind. We hold in mind these virtuous factors. It's significant how many times new students say that it is right speech or being mindful of right speech, which is the first time that they're able to recognize thoughts, words, and deeds that are contrary to these teachings. In other words, they recognize that their speech is less than helpful. They might tell small lies, or they might find themselves gossiping about people. So right speech is speech that is always helpful, never hurtful. It avoids gossip. It avoids lying. It avoids unnecessary or idle chatter. And if you think about all the social engagement that we have today, a lot of our speech is unnecessary and idle chatter. And why is that? What's the problem with idle or unnecessary speech? Well, if we're engaged in it constantly, we're just using it as a distraction from what's occurring. And we're using it from a distraction from what's occurring of our own behavior. That's why it's so hurtful, and that's why the Buddha taught it. So as we deepen our virtuous behavior and we're less engaged in wrong speech, wrong action, and wrong livelihood, our minds will simply be less agitated when we come and meditate. It's a very practical teaching. If we're engaged in a lot of gossip or unnecessary chatter or unnecessary actions or hurtful actions, it's going to leave our minds in a much more agitated state. So when we get to meditation, it's going to be much more difficult. And that's really, and I'm giving a very simplified understanding of why this is part of our practice, but you'll deepen that understanding. And when you take this all into context of the Four Noble Truths, dukkha occurs. Why does dukkha occur in the world? Because of people behaving poorly, because people behaving from self-referential views flowing from that. Imagine if the world was always engaged in right speech, right action, and right livelihood. There'd be no problems at all. The only problems that would be left were the common human problems of sickness, aging, and death. Those are things we can't escape from. But the rest of what the Buddha described as dukkha are fully within our control, whether we experience it. And that's what leads to a calm, peaceful mind. And we'll get into that next week when we talk about the concentration factors of the Eightfold Path. But it all leads to that. So that's your study this week. You'll study that chapter on the virtuous factors, and we'll discuss that, and then we'll introduce the mindfulness factors. Great class. A few announcements. I have raised the requested donation to $15. And as always, don't ever let finances keep you from coming to class. Just talk to me about it. And a lesser fee or no fee at all is perfectly fine with me. What's most important is that we continue to be together as a sangha. So, and I mean that sincerely. Don't ever let money stop you from coming. But expenses arise and all that stuff. I had something else I wanted to say. The spring retreat is coming up rather quickly, May 11th to 14th. I will put up some information on the website about the retreat and the theme of it. I believe it's going to be emptiness. And I'll get the registration going. We just put those dates aside, so I hope you can join us. We had just a great retreat last year, and the other years have been wonderful. So I think that's it for tonight. Anything else? I feel like I'm missing something.
Mindfulness recovery.
Oh yeah, there's a 12-step-based recovery in January 14th, and our next mindfulness-based recovery workshop is February 19th, I think. So no, all that's on the website. I'm no longer teaching in Flemington, but I am teaching in Clinton on Thursday nights. And the Tuesday and Saturday classes are streamed and are available to review if you want. And I also have a streaming class Wednesday at noon. So that's enough of the announcements. Well, let's conclude with any questions or comments before we get into the closing. Let's finish with the Buddha's words on metta. So find your relaxed meditative posture. Gently close your eyes and gently close your mouth. And again, take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body, and let that mindfulness of your breath cease any distracting thoughts to the past or to the future, or that may have arisen from our talk tonight. And metta means goodwill or loving kindness. And metta is both an aspiration for those of us developing the Eightfold Path and an expression of a fully awakened, fully mature human being. And these are the Buddha's words on metta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outward and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is no longer born into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class. Peace. Billy, I failed to mention there's a yellow booklet out there, and that describes meditation in this water context. Please take it with you. And I have a newsletter that I send out every week that describes the class and any changes due to weather. You can sign up for that on the website too. So glad you're here. Welcome. Welcome. Stefan, that was a great question. Thanks for bringing that up. Led to a really good discussion. I'm serious.
If I dust the thing over there.
No, that's permanent.
If you saw my house, you would be like, really? But I don't know, somehow here I kept thinking.
Please. Thank you, Bonnie.
So we can actually work in. You just sign up
My house now.
Well, we just did that. So that's all the stuff we're doing now. And then we're saying today, so that we can paint the door that's going on the retail shop. We're keeping really good.